Alright, ladies and gentlemen, in this video we're going to be talking about Lab 4. And Lab 4 is going to be keying out plants. I want to preface this lab by saying it's not going to be an easy lab. Identifying plants is actually rather challenging and can be and it's a skill to develop. But it's a very important skill. Some of the things that you need in order to do this, first and foremost, is to know what the different plant parts are. That's why we went through Lab 3 last week, of identifying these different plant parts to set you up to be able to identify the plant parts on an actual plant. So what you're going to be doing this week is you're going to be actually looking at different plants and identifying certain parts, and then identifying what the plant is based off of this key put together by the NRCS. So we're going to be talking a lot of how do we navigate this website, how do we go about that process of identifying a plant using this interactive key by the NRCS. I'm also going to preface this lab by saying we're going to be dealing with monocots in this lab. We're going to be dealing a lot of grasses. And grasses historically, from what I found, are a lot harder to identify than a legume. They're going to be a lot harder to identify than a dicot. Just a large part is because of the way the leaves are. Think about most grass leaves. Most grass leaves are going to be set up very similar. They're going to be long and slender. So it's not as easy to identify by that method. On top of that, a lot of times the flowering parts on grasses, they'll often look the same, and there's just minor differences between them all that we've got to identify. So that's what we're going to be doing in this particular lab. So, like I said, we're going to be dealing with with monocots this particular week. So these monocots, these are actually going to be grasses. So now that we're in this particular website, and we're going to go with these Plant Interactive ID keys, we're going to click on grasses. And then as we get into the actual lab, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on each plant. Not only am I going to provide some plants here, some pictures to look at, I'm going to tell you what state they're located in. So on this website, they actually locate or have these keys set out by different states, to where you're not trying to navigate every state in the union. We can identify it based off of a specific state. So you're going to actually have plants that you're going to have to identify that are located in Kansas. You're going to have to locate some that are located in Wyoming, one in Texas, and then one in, I believe, Florida. So we're going to be actually identifying and keying out plants from all over the nation. So the example that we're going to use in this video is this plant right here. So we don't know what this plant is yet. We've got to identify it. But I give you a couple of key information. First off, it's located in Texas, and it's a perennial. So we're going to, first off, go into the grasses portion of this interactive ID key. We're going to scroll down here to Texas and click on this online. And we're going to go through this online interactive ID key. So what we notice is whenever we pull up this particular part of the website is it has a bunch of different characteristics of different plants, and we're going to have to identify this plant based off these characteristics. It also has all of the taxa over here, so it has all of the scientific names of all of the different grasses that are grown in Texas, or that are native or grown in Texas. This includes commodities or crops as well as native grasses. So we can see there's quite a list here. So we don't want to have to go through every single plant type in order to identify this one grass. We want to start identifying it down. And then we've got some buttons up here. We have matching taxa, best, describe remaining taxa, restart. So restart and matching taxa are going to be two buttons we're going to use often. And also this lookup button that's going to be kind of important as we go through this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find 5 key characteristics about this plant that I know that I'm going to start my looking process. First off, I said it's a perennial, so I'm going to go ahead and click on perennial and identify that. Then I'm going to be looking at these plants. So one thing that I notice about this, if I go to this picture, we have the plant that's kind of coming up right here, and then we actually have a stolon that goes between the two plants, another branch or another base or another plant coming up, another stolon. So we know that this plant is actually stoloniferous. We can see that right there. What is a stolon? Well, that's it's more of an above ground root. It connects the two bases of the plant, but it's connecting above ground. So we know that it's stoloniferous. So we know that stolons or runners are present. So we know that's the case. So if we look closely at this plant, another thing that I'm going to notice right away on this particular plant is that we've got kind of flat and linear leaves. Our leaves are going to be flat. They're going to be linear. They look pretty flat. Even down here, they're not really curled all that much. They look pretty flat. So I'm going to find that. So we're going to go down here and we're going to talk about the leaves. And the leaf. So another thing that we're going to look right there is we're going to look right at the base of that leaf sheath. And if you look right there at that sheath, you can see that sheath wraps around that stem, and then all of a sudden it opens wide up. It's very open. It's that plant doesn't just continue, or that leaf doesn't continue to just wrap around that stem above the sheath. So we actually can say that leaf sheath is mostly open or loose. It opens up right away. Now, because I've seen this plant in person, and a lot of times it's easier to identify these plants in person if you had it right there. But this plant doesn't look very big. It actually looks like a pretty short grass. And if we look right here, even the inflorescence that are going to be coming up here, and the stem with the inflorescence doesn't look very tall. So another thing I'm going to say is I'm going to say that stems with inflorescence are going to be about less than 1 meter tall. So this is a pretty short grass. So I'm going to select that stems with inflorescence are less than 1 meter tall. We said that the leaves are pretty flat. So we're going to come down here, and whenever we're talking about these leaves, they're going to say leaf blades are mostly flat. Another thing that we're going to notice is that these leaf blades are linear. They're going to be kind of following in a line. They're like a lot of our monocots, they have those parallel veins. They're going to be that linear plant. So let's go ahead and click on that. And another thing about it is if we look at this plant, it looks kind of like a pretty small plant, pretty narrow leaves. Now, I wouldn't say they're less than 2 millimeters thick, because that's very small, but they're dang sure not going to be getting to 1 or 2 centimeters wide. They're going to be about this 2 to 10 millimeter wide range. So we have some of these things identified. We have leaves are mostly flat, fairly narrow leaves, leaf blades are linear, that leaf sheath is going to be open. We're going to have a pretty short grass, less than 1 meter tall. Stolons are present, perennials. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 or 7 different taxa kind of our characteristics identified. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on matching taxa and see what it gives us. So it narrows it down a lot. It basically says, all right, here is, out of that whole long list, here's all the ones that kind of match it. So now we need to go ahead and identify it down further, because we don't want to have to search through all of these. So we're going to go ahead and keep kind of trying to identify things off of this plant and add to that list. So another thing, and it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but if you look real close right at the base of that leaf, in this picture, it actually has some hairs. So it's actually what we call a ligule. So we have a ligule right here, and it's that kind of that extra, an extra part of that plant that forms right there at that base of that sheath, the base of that leaf. So we know that a ligule is present. So we could actually go in there and say that this ligule is present. And furthermore, like I said, it's kind of hairy right there. It's got it's actually a fringe of hairs. So we can say that this ligule is a fringe of hairs. So I'm going to go ahead and select probably a couple more characteristics about this plant. One thing that I'm missing out a lot on is I'm missing out on the seed head. I'm not really looking at this seed head very much, but if we look at it, this seed head has several inflorescence into it. So we actually see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 different inflorescence. So let's go ahead and start talking about the seed head or some of the, or this flowering part of it. And let's go through some of these inflorescence. So inflorescence are simple spikes. That's an open panicule, and then we're going to dive down here, and here's inflorescence with 2 or more spikes, but this is the one I'm looking more at. Inflorescent with 2 to 10 branches. So we've got the whole inflorescent, the whole flowering part, the whole seeding out part of the plant, and we've got different branches coming off that inflorescent. And we have about 2 to 10. They're not definitely not more than 10, but they're more than 2. So we have that. So those are a couple more. And another thing that I've noticed on here is if you look real close at the seeds, how are those seeds looking? Well, those seeds are coming off of just one side of the branch. It's the seeds aren't coming off both sides of that branch. They're coming off of just one side. So we're going to go ahead and say that these inflorescent branches are one-sided. So let's identify the matching taxa again. So now what we have to do, now that we've identified that, we need to scroll down. And look at that. Our list is a lot shorter. Now, we're down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different plants. That's a lot easier to kind of sort through if we're going to be trying to identify plants. We've got it down to 6 different plants. We know it's probably one of these 6 as long as we identify those characteristics right. And rather than going through all of these, and we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different characteristics we've already identified, rather than trying to go in there and identify more and run the risk of messing up, of identifying the wrong characteristic, which is going to have to make us reset altogether. Let's go ahead and identify these 6 and see kind of what, if we can't identify the plant based off of just these 6, now that we've got it down to a list. And that's perfectly fine to do, ladies and gentlemen. If you can get it down to 1, that's ideal. But if you can't get it down to 1, try to get it down to a pretty short list and then go through them one by one to try and identify them. So let's go ahead and go through this list. And let's first off pick on this Cynodon dactylon. So let's click on that first plant. All right, so we can click on that, and that's going to be called the Cynodon dactylon. And the common name is actually going to be this Bermuda grass. So let's click on it. And let's go through some of the pictures. So, all right, we've got kind of a lot of plants, a lot of like base pretty close together. Kind of resembles that. Okay. We've got a seed head. Man, that seed head looks pretty similar to our seed head over here. Okay, there's the seeds. We can't really identify the individual seeds. We've got the flowering part kind of looks like that. It kind of matches. We've got these long leaves or these little slender leaves. And man, that kind of looks pretty similar. So we're looking pretty similar. Look, there's our stoloniferous plants. That kind of resembles that down there. And we can go through all these images and say, yeah, we're pretty close. That plant looks pretty close. So let's go through the rest of our options. So I'm going to click back over here. We have this, man, I'm going to butcher that name if I try to say it. So we're just going to click on this plant. And we know that this is Egyptian panic grass. So let's click on it and let's look at that. What does that seed head look like? We got a flag leaf right here, and basically looks like one slender inflorescent coming up. That does not resemble our plant. So we're going to go ahead and rule out Egyptian panic grass. That's not one of our options. So let's look at this Spartania petinata. Yeah, I'm butchering that one too. So let's look at that one. And let's click on the pictures and kind of look through the pictures. So we've got these long seed heads on it. Man, that really doesn't resemble our grass really at all. It kind of looks like a taller grass. That seed head really doesn't look like it does over here. Well, we can go ahead and knock off prairie cordgrass as well. Let's look at this one as well. This St. Augustine grass. Let's click on these pictures. Man, we've got, the plant kind of looks a lot like it, but if we look at the seed head, especially this drawing, it looks like we've got one main seed head and then another one that kind of comes off lower, and they look like a long slender one. That really doesn't match our seed head either. We're going to go ahead and rule out St. Augustine grass. And let's go ahead and look at the last two as well. And I can tell you right off the bat, that seed head does not match our seed head. We're going to go ahead and knock off Webster fringe signal grass as well. So let's look at our last potential option. So our last potential option is this African liverseed grass. We really don't have any pictures on it. So let's go ahead and Google African liverseed grass and see if we can find some more pictures. So if we look at this African liver seed grass, we're pulling up images, and that really does not look like our grass at all. The leaves look off on it. So we're going to say that, no, it's not going to be African liver seed grass. That leaves us with one type of grass, and that's going to be Bermuda grass. So we have now successfully taken this picture, identified the key parts of this plant, and identified what that plant is. So essentially, that is going to be kind of the ideal way that you're going to work this. Start identifying some of those characteristics that you know are present. Click on this matching taxa, and if we have a long list like we do here, then keep identifying 2 or 3 more matching taxa until we get to a very short list. Now, so in the next video, we're going to talk about, well, what if we mess up? What if we get down to it and we're left with a list of plants that looks like it, or that we identified as these are our characteristics, but it doesn't match our plants. What can we do to kind of reset and retry again on some of these plants? Which, granted, you're probably going to have to reset and retry on these plants several different times before you get it, until you get it exactly right, because it is hard to identify some of these parts of the plant. So in the next video, we're going to go over that. So, but real quick, before the end of this video, now that we've identified this plant, what am I going to want you to record on that sheet? First off, we identify that it is a Cynodon dactylon. So I want you to go ahead and record the scientific name for me. I want you to record the common name for me. And then I also want you to identify the different characteristics that you used in order to identify that plant. There needs to be at least 5 different characteristics here. It can be, like you can see here, we're actually bumping closer to 8 or 10 characteristics. I want you to record them all. And then furthermore, if we get down to a list and we're not quite sure, we get down to a pretty short list, record all of the remaining plants, the scientific names of the remaining plants that it could have been based off of these characteristics. What could it have been? And then I want you to go ahead and tell me why did you go with that one specific plant, because, and just tell me real briefly, you know, all the other seed heads didn't look right, and then the one that we couldn't really tell on the seed head, we looked at the leaves, and the leaves definitely didn't look right. So tell me, why did you go with that one particular plant rather than all of the rest? But if you get down to one plant, I meant to mention this, if you get down to one plant, you don't need to tell me why you chose that one plant. So for example, some of the characteristics might, after 5 characteristics, might label it just as one plant. You've identified that plant, you don't need to tell me what other plants there were.